like, this is such a bad business mistake. And I'm like, well, but I just know I can't really like give the full experience I would have liked. And I don't want to commit to one-on-one with everybody. Otherwise, it's just not possible.
Let's only give people one option. So when someone comes on it, they see your ad, right? Only thing you do is they click on it or not.
But I'm doing what I'm doing because of your work. So it's the butterfly effect.
I think about the issues that I have to deal with today. If I was given those issues 10 years ago, they would have crushed me, right?
Because at the same time, I feel like it's oftentimes, but it's not easy. Okay, so now that was from 1 million to 10 million. Now what about 10 million to 100 million?
So everyone in the food course can raise their hand. So it's even going wider. So I say, hey, I'm gonna help you get traffic. They come in. How do you get traffic? Okay, the answer is you need a funnel, okay?
And I'm hooked, whatever it is that you're gonna be selling, I'll be like, okay, cool. Like I want one of each. Just because it's like, you feel so connected, but it's not easy to storytell.
People are like, how do we become a good storyteller? You got to tell a bunch of stories and see which ones land, which ones don't land. And so for me, that's what I do. Like I do it on a podcast, and I do it on an interview, then I tell my friends, I tell my wife, I tell my kids, and I'm just watching like, how are they reacting to these stories?
Hi, my name is Aggie, and this is Biohacking Bestie. The one-stop shop for a modern queen, where you can find biohacking courses, self-growth courses, and where you can find the most incredible community of women so you can hit all of your biohacking goals and beyond.
All right, setting a little intention, and I just hope that this podcast will reach the people and all the female and male entrepreneurs that we need to hear it and hear your message. Russell, thank you so much for joining my show. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes, I'm so excited.
You've been on my dream list for so long, and I've been very persistent, so I'm so happy we're finally doing it.
I know I've not done a lot of podcasts, so kind of just getting back into them. And so you were at the top of the list, and so excited to finally have a chance to do this.
Thank you so much. I want to dedicate this podcast to my friend John, because every time I had any question about my business, he's like, you just don't know the Red Book by heart. And so for anyone who doesn't know the Red Book, and he basically believes that every single secret to the universe is in this book and everything is there. So he's like, he knows it by heart. He's obviously crashing in business because of you. So sending a massive gratitude from John. It is incredible. It's kind of like, I don't think there is a single person on the planet that made more millionaires than you did.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's been the last 10 years since I wrote that book has been like the craziest ride ever. And it's been so much fun, so fulfilling.
Let's start from like the biohacking perspective. What allows you to keep going?
Well, it's funny you say that today, because I'm actually on day number 4 of a 5-day water fast. So
I saw that on the stories. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's funny because when I first got into this world, when I wrote the .com Secrets book and then we launched ClickFunnels and put it out there, I didn't know what was going to happen. Like I was just kind of doing this thing. And what's crazy is all of the crazy people, I say that like affectionately, all the crazy people in every market came into my world. So like the people that like had these different ideas on health or on fitness or on marriages or on like everything, they all came into our world and they started joining my masterminds, my inner circle. And so like I started hanging out with all these people who were so fascinating. They were like, again, they were like the oddballs in every market that were doing these crazy things. And so one of the first, like the very first year of ClickFunnels, I remember Dave Asprey all of a sudden launches on our platform. And like, we see Dave Asprey, I'm like, and I didn't know who he was, but he was doing this whole bulletproof coffee thing. And again, I'm a Mormon, so I don't drink coffee, but everyone around me was doing it. They were all talking about it. They're like, Dave Asprey is, and I'm like, who's Dave Asprey? Like, and so I got introduced to that whole world, and they were using ClickFunnels. And so I called them up on the phone. I was like, we come like build a funnel for you. And so we flew out and I spent a day with him in the Bulletproof Cafe in LA. And we filmed with him in there. And then while we're there, like he's giving us bulletproof ice cream and like we're trying all the things. And I was like, this is the coolest thing in the world. And so like, I just started getting like indoctrinated into that world and him and then all of the people around that world. And then people started sending me all these things. And so we started getting all these biohacking things in the mail every single day, just random products and stuff. And so I became mildly obsessed with it. And in that window, I lost like, I don't know, 30 or 40 pounds. I had more energy. I was having more fun. And now I'm like just hardcore into all the things because, you know, and I've got your book here. I got this for my wife. I was like, and my wife's into biohacking as well. So I was like, cool, there's a book for you. Like sometimes she's like, this is weird, Russell. You sure this is a real thing? And so your book has made it more like, this is for, because a lot of the biohacking stuff is very masculine, you know, like, all right, we're going to go and increase our testosterone and do this and do that. Whereas this was like very much for her, like, oh, this is something that women can do too, which is, so I'm very grateful for you writing that for her as well. But I just love it because it's given me as an entrepreneur, like so much more energy. It's funny because I don't think I realized it when I started the ClickFunnels journey, I was again like 30 pounds heavier, but I didn't realize that was the thing. When I lost the weight, it blew my mind. I was like, I have so much more energy. Like, how did I have any? You don't feel like, you don't notice it until you shift on the other side, and all of a sudden you're like, I don't know, you have more hours every single day to get stuff done because of just the side impact of the whole biohacking journey. So I love it.
Yeah. And I also totally, there's this idea that we all have the same amount of hours and, like you can't like cheat time, but I think you can. If you have more energy, you can cheat time because you're just so much more productive.
Yeah.
So biohacking is very masculine. So I would say is ClickFunnels, right? So there's women are trying to get in there, but it feels very intimidating for us women, even for myself, because it's like you guys are so driven and powerful and talk all the numbers, and we women tend to be a little bit more intuitive and make decisions in the business that maybe don't really add up to the bottom line, but feel like that would be the right thing to do for the customer. So what has been your experience working with women through the funnels, or just like as women entrepreneurs and that are in their feminine energy as well as versus men, because I know there are women that are very like masculine energy, but I'm talking about like actual feminine energy.
Yeah. It's been fascinating because like prior to ClickFunnels, I was coaching and teaching entrepreneurs, but it was crazy because the majority of people came to me were just men. So like that's all I dealt with the first, 5 or 6 years of my business. And then when ClickFunnels launched, initially it was still men. And then we had our very first female, like real success story was Liz Benny. She came in, she had success with it. I remember we put her on stage, and all of a sudden like that started attracting all of these women into our world. And so it's been fun because now if you come to our events, like our speakers are almost 50-50 men and women. You look at like the rooms, it's like 50-50 men and women. So it's been really fun seeing that transition first off. But there's definitely differences, right? Especially like the really feminine women. Like it's cool because like I feel like what you see is like they serve at a different level. And so a lot of them are like analytical driven, like trying to get math and numbers, but they're so much better with people, better with content, better with like connection. And so a lot of times they're able to do a lot of stuff that honestly like that we're not able, like I'm able to get my message out because I'm buying ads, I'm looking at those kind of things. But it's harder for me to connect a lot of times where I look at some of the women in our audience who go out there and they have these huge followings of people. And a lot of them aren't even buying ads, but they get so much organic stuff because of how they're able to like bring people into them and connect with them. It's really fascinating. Some of the businesses and brands have been built off of that. Not that you can't have both, but anyway, it's just kind of, it's really fascinating to watch.
Because I think like on the outside, ClickFunnels, so before I got in, I felt like it was very intimidating. And I got to know you and I feel like you're not intimidating at all. And I know there are a lot of women. I think it's just that initial reaction when you get into a business that it feels masculine, right? And I think I try to get more women into the space. I have a crazy story. I slept on the bathroom floor trying to attend Tony Robbins' seminar because I couldn't afford it. So I borrowed money and I like slept in a hotel on the bathroom floor because that was my budget. So I'm bootstrapping my entire life. All of my businesses are just, I don't have outside investors. I just like, try to figure things out and learn from people like you and try to encourage more women that they don't have to have it all. We often think that we start so big, right? You see a lot of people like these massive success stories, and obviously your company blew up so quickly. And it's really easy to feel intimidated because you feel like, oh my God, he made 17 million a month and you just started and da. So how do you not get discouraged? Like what's going on in your head? Because I'm sure you're comparing yourself to the $1 billion club and you'd be like, oh, I could be making this and that. How do you not get, in your head?
It's been interesting, and I try to share with the entrepreneurs a lot because I see that so many times people come in and they get discouraged quickly, or like people are chasing like, I need to make money, and they're stressing about that. And what I found is like when people are chasing the money, it's rare they actually find the money. The transition that happened for me personally, and I try to share with people because this is where it shifts everything. It's when it shifts from like, I'm trying to make money to the shift becomes like, who is the person that I've been called to serve? And one of my friends, Alex Sharf, and he calls it the call to contribution. He's like, if you feel that tug, he's like, it's the call to contribution. You feel called to contribute, to help. And I believe that's like a feeling from God. It's like, I think every single one of us have gone through unique things in our life, right? Both the successes we've had, but also the failures, the downsides, the things that didn't work in our life, right? Because of that, we've become somebody. And now the calling is like, you've been called to serve people who have not, like you have the map that they're looking for, right? I always tell people like your dream customer is usually you 5 years ago. Like, so where were you 5 years ago before you figured out this stuff, right? Like I follow you, I watch your stories. Like your book. Like I know your story 5 years ago, with things you were struggling with, and like you overcame those things. You solved it. You created you figured out how to solve those things for yourself. And so the person you're serving now is you 5 years ago, right? The person who's struggling with the same things. And like God has called you literally. He's given you the answers through your trials and your ups and your downs to be able to go back and to serve those people. And when you shift the mindset from like, how do I make money? Oh, so-and-so's making this much money. It's like, you forget about all that. You say, like, I've been called to serve these people, and my job is to figure out how can I serve these people and change their life. And when that becomes the focus, the weirdest thing happens. And number one, you're able to find those people because you know who they are because they're you 5 years ago. And then number two, you start making money because you know how to serve those people. You know, like, what would I need? What would I want? What would have helped me to be successful, right? We shift from being like product-centered people. We're like, what's the product we're going to create to make money with, to like, here's my customers. How do I change their life? What are they looking for? What do they need first? What do they need second? And when you like make that mindset shift, it's the craziest thing, because then all the money and all the things actually start following. But it's like not focusing on the money, it's focusing on the customer and like, how do I serve this person? How do I like focus everything there? And when you do that, that's when it transitions. And that's when you stop worrying about how much money I make or how much my so-and-so making, or like, I think it takes away the intimidation. You're not worrying about where you're trying to get to, you're worrying about who you're serving, and then they will take you to where you're trying to get to. And that's the transition.
It's so beautiful because you're very mission driven. And I think in my journey, I catch myself sometimes thinking like, oh, I should be making more money, or like, I want to like, you feel like you constantly have to go up. I started with biohacking courses and like self-growth courses, and now we realize we want to serve people better. And I'm like, it would be so much easier if I could transition into an app. And every single person is like, oh, you're going to make less money and you can't like funnel, by the way. So like, you won't be able to funnel the app. Like, this is such a bad business mistake. And I'm like, well, but I just know I can't really like give the full experience I would have liked. And I don't want to commit to one-on-one with everybody. Otherwise, it's just not possible. And so we'll see how that one goes. I would love for everyone who's listening to this, get into funnels, because I think one of the myths that you debunk is that like, everyone thinks that their business wouldn't work for the funnels. And here I am thinking the same thing after all these years. You have some great examples if you can share. Maybe just in case someone doesn't know what a funnel is, if you can share. Because even right now, I had a funnel for Black Friday and people are like, well, when I click the bundle and it takes me to another website asking me to add some courses. I'm like, yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Funnel. And I'm like, is the website broken? I'm like, no, this is part of the experience. You're just going through the aisle.
Oh, I love it. Well, it's funny because like I think that's the number one question I've gotten for the last decade. Is like, what's a funnel? And like the reality is like I think a better question is like, what's not a funnel? Like everything is a funnel. You think about this. And I know you guys recently got married and like I've been watching behind the scenes, the whole experience. But I think about even like my wife and I, we've been married now 22 years. But like our marriage life was a funnel, right? Like initially I was out there, I was dating a lot of people at the top of the funnel, right? Eventually we find more we like, and eventually you find someone to get married, and like, that's the process, right? Everything's a funnel. And so like, the reality is if someone has a business, you have a funnel, it's just probably not a good one. So instead it's like, what makes a funnel good? Like, let's think about that. Because right now, if you think about this with our businesses, right, there's like 8 billion people in the world. And then from that, there's like 6 billion that are on Facebook, let's say. And then from that, let's say we buy ads. And from the 6 billion online, maybe 10 million will see my ad. And from 10 million to see my ad, maybe 1 million will click on the ad. And from 1 million click, maybe 100,000 will come to my landing page. And then from that, 10,000 give me their email address. So like, we're taking people through, like, everything is a funnel, right? We're just taking people through this process. And so the question is like, how do I make sure that my funnel is going to be the best? Like it's going to be the best experience for customers going through it, but it also makes the most amount of money from it, right? And so for me, I'm always thinking about that. The world's a funnel. There are 8 billion people in the world, 6 billion on Facebook. What's the, for you, like maybe there's 10 million who are females who want to learn biohacking and weight loss stuff, right? It's like, that's the top of the funnel you're focusing on, right? So it's like, okay, what's the things I'm going to put out? What are the ads or the offers I put out to get their attention? And I talk about this in the book slide. I talk about this concept of hook, story, offer, right? First thing we're doing is trying to throw a hook into the market. And the goal of the hook is to grab their attention, right? Because people are on their phones and they're scrolling all day. So we throw out a hook to grab their attention just long enough that then you can tell them your story. You tell them a story and they're like, wow, I connect to this person, or I don't. If they don't, then they leave and they don't make it to the next step in the funnel. But if you hook them, right, and then they hear your story, like, wow, I really connect with this person, then they'll go to the next step in the funnel, right? And then they'll click on the link and to go to the landing page. And then maybe on that page, it'll ask for the email address. And so we start taking them through this process where it takes them step by step to help give them a great experience, but at the same time, then to offer them your products and give them upsells and things like that down the journey, right? But what people did prior to funnel marketing is they would create a website with 1,000 links, 1,000 offers, and it's just like, it was chaos, right? And there's a term in marketing that says, a confused mind always says no. And so most people, they send people to this website with a million different options, and a confused mind always says no, and they don't buy anything. And so what a funnel does is it simplifies the process. It says, okay, let's only give people one option. So when someone comes on it, they see your ad, right? Only thing they do is they click on it or not. That's the one option. They click on it. Then they come to a page, and the page, there's not 2 options or 3, it's just one. Like, maybe it's a landing page where you're asking for email. Like, hey, if you give me an email, I'll give you this one thing. And that's the only option they have, right? The one thing. And then they give you email. The next page, like, okay, watch the video. There's only one thing we're going to do here. So we just take them through a very simple process to build a relationship with them, to tell them our story, to make them offers, and kind of take them down that journey. That's kind of what a funnel is and how it works. But again, the key is like everything's a funnel. It's just most funnels are really bad. So how do we make something that's really good that takes somebody on this journey where they come in, we build a relationship, we can serve them, they buy products from us, and we can change their life.
I watched your video from the 10th anniversary of ClickFunnels, and you said that entrepreneurs are those crazy people that decide to solve other people's problems. And I really resonate with that because I think, growing up Catholic in Poland, I'm going to speak for a lot of Polish people, that we're being taught that if you are an entrepreneur or try to make a lot of money, you're a little greedy, and it doesn't align with the spiritual values. And I would like to hear how spirituality has helped you and religion, and having that practice and connection with the divine help you become better at serving people.
Yeah, it's fascinating for me. For the first 4 or 5 years of ClickFunnels, I always had this weird thing. I was like, there's like spiritual Russell, who's like,
Yeah, like 2 different worlds, right? Yeah.
yeah. And I was scared to death. I thought they were completely different. And I was like, these are 2 different things. Like, God does not care about my business, and he wants me over here. And it's funny because I hired this coach, actually. She's an amazing coach. And I was doing coaching call with her, and she was someone who was one of my student first. So they came into my world, they learned their stuff, they launched a business, and they're very successful. And then I hired her to be my coach. And it was fascinating because we were having this conversation about that. And she's like, I can't remember what the question was, but I remember she stopped me and she said, you think those 2 things are separate? I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, you think your business and your spiritual calling are separate? I'm like, oh yeah, they're completely different things. And she's like, don't you understand? And I was like, but I'm teaching people how to make money, build businesses. God does not care about that. And she's like, you missed the point, Russell. She's like, when we came into your world, like, we were financially in bondage. We had no money. We couldn't serve people. We couldn't serve ourselves. We couldn't get a home for our family. She's like, you gave us, yes, you taught us how to build a business, but you broke us from financial bondage. She's like, after we broke free from that, guess what? Now we were able to upgrade our family and our life, but on top of that, now we can serve in our church, but we can donate money to charity. Like, and then the people that our businesses are serving, we're changing their life. She's like, the thing that you're doing now is the greatest thing that God could possibly do with you, because you gave us freedom, and now we can free other people. And you're doing that for thousands and millions of other people. And it was the first time I clicked. I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I never realized those 2 things were the same. And that's for me when that feeling or that understanding of like, this is a calling from God became real for me. It was like, this is not just, I'm trying to make some money and trying to hustle and try to figure these things out. It's like, why did God 20 years ago, why did he make me interested in funnels, right? Before funnels were a thing. Like, for some reason, I barely graduated high school, barely graduated college. And all of a sudden, like, I become fascinated with marketing and sales funnels. So 20 years, I'm studying stuff, I'm learning, I'm geeking out. Why did God like plant that seed in my heart? Like, I didn't know. And it checks out, 17 years later, we were at a Funnel Hacking Live event. And I remember we had 5,000 people in the audience. We brought this company called Operation Underground Railroad on stage, and we're talking about saving kids from sex slavery. And we ended up raising $1 million to save kids from sex slavery, which is like the equivalent of, I think it's like 500 or 600 kids would save from that thing. And I remember that night having this realization. I'm like, wow, 20 years ago, God planted in my heart this desire to learn marketing. 17 years later, whatever, 20 years later, it helped to free 500 kids from sex slavery. I'm like, it's so interesting how he works, how he plants these seeds and gives us desires and interests and things like that, right? So that call to contribution that we feel, that's why I believe so hard that is God. Like, if you guys are here hearing this and you feel called to help somebody, it's intertwined. Like, I don't know all of your the people who have read your book and gone through like the stuff that you teach people. My guess is like, you have probably freed so many women from pain, physical pain, mental pain, things like that, where they couldn't show up in their family because of that pain, right? And now they're able to show up in their family. They're better mothers, better wives, better leaders, better entrepreneurs because of what you've done for them, right?
But I'm doing what I'm doing because of your work. So it's the butterfly effect that you have on those women too, right? Because it's like, that's the beautiful thing, that it spreads so big. I just wasn't sure how much you see this big impact that you have with each one of us that have gone through your book and audiobook and your book again.
It's hard to track the ripple effect, but I love watch that, because I think about people see like, oh, you have 100,000 members in ClickFunnels, but for me, it's like, that's 100,000 entrepreneurs, and each entrepreneur is someone like you who has a story, and like the ripple effect, it's really special for me and our team when we think about it. We have a mantra inside our internal office. We always, every time we do a meeting, we end it with like this concept. In fact, Dave Woodward, who was my old business partner, he used to always say this at the end of every meeting. It's like, what we do matters. He tells the stories like, what we do matters, guys. This is not just a job or a business. Like, what we do matters. Like, we are changing people's lives, and
I
they're
love
changing
that.
their people's lives. And anyway, it makes it really cool.
It's worth just pausing, actually just like acknowledging your own success, because we often feel like women in spirituality often think like it's boasting, right? Or feeling like, oh, I'm blowing up my ego by saying like what I do really matters. But I think at the same time, it's just like understanding that this doesn't come from you. It comes from something so much greater, and you're essentially serving, and you get to be part of something bigger.
Be a little piece in people's journey is really special. And you're right, like it's not from you, like, right? Like you didn't create you didn't put these desires in your heart. Like they're there from somebody else. And so it's like, it's a dishonor to him if we don't, I don't know, if we don't acknowledge it.
So how do you manage? I'm sure, like, what does Russell do on a good day when he's feeling like he's best? What kind of the internal dialogue that you have? What are things that you struggle with? And what is it like on not so great day? And how do you get out of the funk?
Oh man, that's a good
Because
question.
from the outside, you feel like, oh my God, he's always on. He's always like speaking fast, full of energy. I was like, wow. And not drinking coffee. I'm like, how is this guy doing it?
Part of it's obviously is like when we're going live on social media, like even if we're tired, we have the ability to turn on and be like, hey, what's going on? You know what I mean? So it's hard because people just see that. But I think I struggle with same doubts and insecurities everybody else does. Frustration with pain, with enemies, with like all sorts of stuff. So we're always there. But I would say on my good days, for me, the good days are where like I get a chance to come in and create. Like that's my favorite stuff, is like the inspiration, the creation. So like those days where I get to come and create and do stuff like things like this that are fun, that are exciting, like talking to cool people, like those bring me energy. There's a lot of days where it's like there's things on fire, things are burning to the ground. I gotta like how do we solve this? How do we,
Because I feel like like when the shit hits the fan, and I hope it doesn't as often as it maybe used to, or maybe it's just me problem, not everyone else when you have, but it sometimes feels like, why is this happening again, right? And so like, how do you keep your cool? Because I imagine your team is looking to you to lead in those situations and being in charge and whatnot. And there's a part of you that just feels like, oh my God, I'm also like freaking out right now.
I'm freaked out inside. And I think a lot of it too is, well, the nice thing about this is it's kind of like having a baby. Like you have a baby, and like I remember when we had twins initially, we were so scared and like, how are we going to handle all the stress? And they show up and they're like, oh, they sleep for a long time. Like, okay, this is cool. And then over time they get harder, but you increase your own capacity to handle this thing. And I think about the issues that I have to deal with today. If I was given those issues 10 years ago, they would have crushed me, right? But over time, it's like you have these issues, you solve them, and it increases your capacity. You increase your capacity over time. And so I think for a lot of it, it's obviously dealing with it, you get better and better dealing with it. But the other thing is like, a lot of times the problems that we have, or the frustrations, were things that we would have dreamt about a long time ago. I remember a couple of years ago, we were having some issue with Funnel Hacking Live and trying to get 5,000 or 6,000 people in, and it was during COVID and the mask and all sorts of, and like, how do we get these people in? And people bought tickets, and we're like, we're so stressed out, all the anxiety, all stuff. And then I remember stopping. I was like, all right, you guys, check this out. This is such a good problem to have. Like we're stressing out, trying to figure out how to do this thing. But like our old problems were nobody showed up. Like my very first event I ever did, 2 people showed up. That problem was stressful, right? Now we're trying to figure out how do we get 3,000 people in a room when there's COVID restrictions and there's like no one's allowed to talk to each other, or touch each other. And like it's a better problem to have. I think that's the one part. And then number 2 is like every time it gets really heavy, I try to stop, and I've told my team this, I've told my wife this a lot of times. I'm like what we're doing, like, yes, it matters, but at the same time, like, this is just a game. Like none of this actually matters. Like what matters is that, the relationships we have, that they're good, but everything else, like we're doing this business to distract ourselves until we die. Because there's nothing like, this is really fun. It's a really fun game to play, and it doesn't actually matter. And if you put it in perspective, it's like worst case scenario, it goes away, we're all going to be okay. Like it doesn't actually matter. But man, it's such a fulfilling, fun thing to do while we're here on earth, like while we have a chance to serve and change people's lives. And so I think for me, it's trying to put those things in perspective, and then realizing like, man, the problems we have today are strengthening us for the problems we have tomorrow. Because like, I'm sure you deal with it too. It gets heavy sometimes. I think God, I've heard this quote before, but he doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. So he calls you, and then he starts giving you pressure, and then he increases your capacity and gives you a little more.
I love that.
My very first product I launched was like this DVD teaching people how to make potato guns, right? And I feel like God inspired me, hey, Russell, let's see what you're going to do with this. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard this before. They see somebody launch something like, oh, I had that same idea. Like, and I think God gives a lot of us the same ideas. Like, okay, he's going to see like, who's actually going to be a good steward of this idea, right? So give us an idea.
Oh, I love that.
And then he says, hey, Russell took this potato gun idea, which is not a very good idea, but he took it, he did something with it. It's like, okay, I can trust him with ideas. I'm going to give him another idea and see if he'll be a good steward of that one.
Wow. Oof, I have goosebumps because it's so powerful.
And then you see it over time because it's like, if you're willing to take these ideas and be a good steward of them, then he'll give you another idea, another idea. And for me, it was 10 years into it. And one day he was like, ClickFunnels. And he gave me the idea. And because I was a good steward of it, then he like gave me this thing, and then boom, we created ClickFunnels, right? And I think that a lot of people are waiting for their big thing that's going to change the world. It's like, God's going to give you a lot of little things first to test you, to see if you'll be willing to do it. And if you will, he'll increase your capacity to handle the next thing. And he'll increase your capacity till eventually you'll have the big thing that's going to be your ClickFunnels or your, whatever your thing might be.
Wow. Wow. So powerful. You mentioned that the problems that you have now, obviously they will freak you out back in the day. What would you say is the difference that you see between entrepreneurs that are starting, those that are trying to get from 7 figures to 8 figures and 8 figures to, 9 or 10?
It's funny because usually from $0 to $1 million is usually like, it's like a psychological battle with the entrepreneur inside their own head. Like it's usually that, right? It's like, am I good enough? Am I worthy? Can I even do this? Am I allowed to do this? Like, what if I mess up? Like, it's like that becomes this big thing. And I watch people, because for us inside of our world, like we have the 2 Comma Club award, right? So when someone makes $1 million, they get that award. And there's like, and it's interesting because that's almost like this turning path, right? When they hit that first milestone, they made $1 million, like they've overcome so much of the internal problems. In fact, I remember Steve Larson told me one day, he's like, launching a business is like the greatest personal development event of all time, because you have to like become okay with yourself. And like, it's like such a mental struggle. And then after they get to $1 million mark, at that point, like a lot of times they solve like their own internal things, but then going from 1 million to 10 million is usually traditionally, it's not more of like you being the all-star, right? Like you being Michael Jordan being amazing. It's you shifting from being the all-star of the team to now you become the coach. And now this is when you start bringing in the team, right? From going from 1 million to 10 million is very difficult to do as a solo entrepreneur. This is where you're bringing in your team. And what's crazy is the skill set you need to go from to be the coach, for me an all-star to be a coach, it's a completely different skill set.
And it's also like the human factor of like someone's having a bad day or someone's having a meltdown. And you're like, oh my God, I now need to be a therapist and I need to do this. And I'm like, I'm so underqualified for this job. Like, I don't know what to do.
It's so hard. It's like I see a lot of people who start transitioning into that, and then it freaks them out, and then they go back like, never mind, I'm just gonna be the all-star. I'm comfortable here. I know how to play this play. I'm just gonna do that, right? Where it's tough. And so that transition from 1 million to 10 million is all about like going from being an all-star to the coach. And so it's different skill set, different mindset, because now it's no longer all about you. It's about you coaching the next level. And so again, a lot of entrepreneurs don't make it through that. And that's okay too. Some people say, I'm gonna be happy just being here at this level, and that's fine. But it's harder to increase impact until you transition to the coach. And that's the next tier, right? And so it sounds like that's what you're going through right now, which is exciting and scary, but it's the next personal development, right? Because now you're personal development like yourself, but now you're also helping all of them. And you got to help all of them to figure out the stuff that you figured out during the first phase, which is hard.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest lie. You start making, you start a business and you made $1 million. I'm like, oh, I just need to do more of the same thing. And it's like, no. Now you have to do something completely different that you are not necessarily good at. And you have to learn it from scratch and like figure out how to make more of you. And for them, and I think my biggest personal issue is that I want to empower my team to make decisions without me, but they still a little scared. And so I get decision fatigue with like, oh, what's the code that we're using? What do we do? I'm like, oh, I really need someone to like, just like run with it. Cause I don't want to be making decision everything, but I have empathy for everyone who's going through that right now, because it is really different skill set.
Do you want me to teach you one of my secrets that I learned? I've never actually shared this publicly before. Okay, everyone on my internal team knows this, because I got the same spot where there's like so much decision fatigue, where I get home at night and I just sit there and my wife's like, what do you want for dinner? I'm like, I don't know how to answer this. Like, I'm so overwhelmed. And so this comes from an analogy from one of the books of scripture that my faith read. It's a book called the Book of Mormon. And there's a cool story in there. And in the story, what happens is there's this group of people and they're trying to come across the ocean, right? And so these guys don't know how to build boats or anything. And so God tells them, you need to take your family across the ocean. So they're like, oh, well, how do we do that? So God's like, okay, you're going to build these boats. And the way the boat's going to work, it's going to be like a dish. There's going to be a bottom and a top dish. And you're going to throw them in the ocean. What'll happen is like, they'll get tossed to and fro. But like, he's like, I'll push you through the waters and get you across the ocean to the American continent. And so they go and they build these boats. And they're like, cool, we got these boats. The guy's name is his brother Jared. So the brother Jared goes and he prays, like, okay, God, we have these boats. Now, like, how do we get air? Because we're going to suffocate in these boats. We're all going to die. And he's like, oh, well, cut a hole in the top, cut a hole in the bottom. And then when the boat's this way, you pop off the top and you can breathe. But it flips over, then you can close it and open up the other way. And that way you've got air. And they're like, cool. So they go cut the holes in the top and the bottom. And they're like, hey, we're about to go on our voyage. And then the brother Jared's like, we don't have any light. So he goes back to God. He's like, okay, God, how do we get light in these boats? Because we're going to be on the sea for who knows how long and we won't be able to see anything. And God says, how about this? Go figure out the answer and then come back and let me know. And so the brother Jared's like, what do I do? And so he goes out and he's like, how do I make light? I don't know how to make light. And so finally he's like, I have this idea. He's like, this is my idea. I'm going to go and find a bunch of rocks, like crystal clear, beautiful rocks. I'm going to bring these rocks back. He's like, I think if I ask God to touch them, maybe they'll glow. So he finds all these rocks. He comes back. He goes back to pray to God. He's like, hey, this is my idea. I think if you touch these rocks, they'll glow and then we can use those to light in the boat. And all of a sudden you see like there's this cloud and the cloud parts and God's hand comes through and you see his finger, he touches each of the stones and they start glowing. And they take these stones, put them in the boats, and that becomes their light source. And so I tell my people, I said, I need you to think like the brother Jared. If I've solved every problem, it's never gonna be a problem. Go out there and figure out the answer, and I want you to bring it back to me, and I'm just gonna touch the stone. So you're not gonna ask me a question, you're gonna go figure out, solve it, bring it back. And so my team knows, like literally, Jenny, right before I jumped here, she ran real quick, she's like, hey, can you touch the stone on this real quick? I'm like, I love it, boom, go. And then she can go run with it. And so I try to get my team thinking like that, like, I need you to go solve the problem, and maybe you come back and it's not the right problem, but do your best, and then bring it to me and I'll touch the stone. And if it works, then you can go run with it. It's given my team the ability to go and like try to figure out the answer and then bring it back. And then I can be like, oh, I love that. Or if it's like, that's not quite right, change it this way, they can make that adjustment. But then they're thinking through the majority of it. And then I just come and touch the stone and then they feel empowered to do what they need to do as well. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and no, 100%. A lot of times it's just like, they come to me and I'm like, but what's the problem here? Because I'm like, just like, what's the bottom line? Oh, the problem is something completely different because they send me like so much information. I'm like, just tell me what their problem is, what you think we should do, and another solution, and we can just discuss. Because at the same time, I feel like it's oftentimes, but it's not easy. Okay, so now that was from 1 million to 10 million. Now what about 10 million to 100 million?
Ooh, 10 million to 100 million. So it's interesting because, again, the first part's you as the entrepreneur, second part's building out a team, third part is understanding language. I know it seems weird, but this is where most people mistake it, right? When you are a growing company initially, there's different phases, right? Initially, when you launch a company, the people that will come to you initially are like the early adopters, right? Usually people, in fact, there's a really good book called Crossing the Chasm. And in it shows this graph that looks like this, right? So there's like the first phase of business is like the early adopters, and the second phase is the innovators, and then there's the big gap. And after the gap, then there's like all the rest of the people, right? And so what happens is we get really good at speaking to the early adopters, right? They geek out on us, right? So like you think about .com Secrets. .com Secrets is my first book, and it was speaking towards about funnels and about all these like these nerdy things. But the early adopters like, this is amazing. They read it, they loved it, they started building funnels, right? As we started getting to the masses, like when we started growing ClickFunnels and we were getting people who were hairdressers in, and they were getting people who were like every business you could dream of were coming into our world. Those people, they don't understand the same language. If I walk into a hairdresser, I'm like, hey, do you want a funnel to grow your company? They're like, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense, right? And so like we have to change, like we get too smart. Like we know all the verbiage and the technobabble of our industry, and we keep using those things, right? And so the people in our industry understand those words and they connect with you. But when you try to go outside that, when you cross the chasm to the mass market, the mass market doesn't understand those words. It confuses them and it scares them. So if you look at the advertising we do to get to the masses, for me to go from 8 figures to 9 figures, I had to shift our language patterns, right? I had to shift away from like how to build a funnel, because that doesn't resonate with most of the world, right? Shift our language, like our ads, our messaging, our offers were very much different, right? So the first phase of this for us was Expert Secrets. I wrote the Expert Secrets book because the goal of that book was not to speak to the people who wanted funnels, because most people don't know that they want a funnel. But there's a group of people, right? This bigger market who they have expertise, they have knowledge, they're educators, they're teachers, they're content creators. And so I was like, I can teach you guys how to get your message out to the world. That becomes a general market, right? If I walk into the corner of the mall, like, who here has got a message they want to get out to the world? A lot of people raise their hand. If I ask who here wants a funnel, nobody at the food court of the mall is going to raise their hand, right? But who here got a message? There's a lot more people. So I say, I'm going to teach you guys how to take your message and get out to the world. Different language pattern. Those people come in, they're excited. And then the answer to how I do that is you need a funnel, right? But I'm expanding my language to be able to go out to more people, right? My third book was Traffic Secrets. That's the next level, even wider, right? Traffic Secrets, like, who here's got a website, you want traffic to it, right? If I go to the food court of the mall, who here's got a website and wants to get traffic to it? Most people nowadays have something. They have a social something. They all want traffic. So everyone in the food court is going to raise their hand. So it's even going wider. So I say, hey, I'm gonna help you get traffic. They come in. How do I get traffic? Okay, the answer is you need a funnel. Okay, but you notice if I went to the food court and said, who wants a funnel? No one's gonna say yes. And so I'm shifting my language patterns to speak to the masses. And so that's how you get to the next level. It's crazy, but it's shifting your language, shifting like the offers you're putting out there that are more general and just to bring people in. And your product can still be the answer, but I got to grab them with a different thing that's going to bring more of these people into my world.
Well, I can just say from my personal experience, when I first got into biohacking, that word alone was super intimidating
Very
for people.
intimidating, yeah.
And people are like, is it a medication? I'm like, oh, that's so funny because obviously when you're in your biohacking bubble and you know Dave, obviously like you're so used to it. And I think we often try to impress people in our industry and we use the language. And I think what maybe like contributes to my success in the space is because I was like, I had to let go of that need to like impress Dave and impress everyone in the space. Cause I was like, I'll never be them. They're like doctors and, they're clearly like scientists. And I just want to like basically lead with the problem. And a lot of times when I think of women, they essentially want to just feel good, lose weight and have energy. And then that's like what I try to communicate. And I think no one wants, if I went to the food court and said like, do you want to go biohacking? People are like, no, I'm good. Whatever that is, like you keep it. But if I say, hey, do you want to feel amazing, lose weight and have great energy? People are like, yeah, yeah. So I think that's like a beautiful story. How is storytelling helpful in like, making more sales? Because you're such a good storyteller. I could just sit here and listen to you. Like even like your books, like I prefer them on audiobook because it's so beautiful to listen. And I'm hooked. Whatever it is that you're going to be selling, I'll be like, okay, cool. Like I want one of each. Just because it's like you feel so connected, but it's not easy to storytell. I feel like when you in the story, aka your life, it's super hard to like reflect back of what your story is, or even the mini storytelling that happens on Instagram stories or social media every day, right? Like it feels like a lot of people like, well, I have no story to tell. I'm just sitting in front of my laptop and just, feeding my family and that's it.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to feel the exact same way. I was like, I don't have any stories. Like, who am I? It's funny. And now I tell 500 stories a day. And I think my staff are annoyed. Like, Russell, you telling this story again? For me, what happened is, so Dan Kennedy was my first big mentor. And I remember they used to teach copyright. So I would learn copyright and like, I was trying to learn how to be a copywriter. And I kind of hated it because like they use all these copywriting terms. I was like, And I remember he did an event called the Influential Writing Workshop. And so I went to this event. And what's crazy, I was expecting to learn how to write copy, to like convince people to give me money. And the entire event was just about story. He talked about story for a long time and then he made us sit down and he's like, you need to create an inventory of stories. I was like, I don't want to do that. That sounds horrible. But we literally sat down and he had a big pad of paper and it was like, okay, what are stories you have that relate back to your audience, right? And I took this little step further in Expert Secrets book because for me, it made it more simple. Like, what's the false belief that my dream customer has, right? Like, what's the reason why they wouldn't give me money? And I started thinking about that. And I said, and then my next question is, okay, so here's the false belief. What is the experience they went through that gave them that false belief, right? So let's say the false belief is like, with biohackers, like, I can't lose weight. Like, that's the false belief they have, right? Okay, why do they believe that? Well, I tried to lose weight in the past and I failed on 4 diets, so I can't lose weight. So there's the false belief they have, right? And that's the experience that they tried it and failed. So now it's like, what's the story that they're telling themselves? And like, what's the subconscious story that pops up every time they think about losing weight? They see the ad and subconsciously, boom, the story pops up instantly in their brain, right? With subconscious, the story could be like, yeah, I've got AgB&x, therefore I can't lose weight. So that's the story. So every time they see the ad pops up, you can't lose weight. And so my question then, I got to figure out is like, what story do I have that will trump their story? Like, what's the story I have? And so for me, that's what I started to do is I started listing out, here's all the false beliefs of my customers. And then what experience do they go through? Then what's the story they're telling themselves? As soon as I identify, here's the story they're telling themselves, then it became really easy. Like, oh, I have a story about that. Like the reason why I don't believe that anymore is because of this, right? Because most of us have the same false beliefs that our dream customer had at one time, right? But we overcame that for some reason. So why did we overcome that? So one of the examples I share a lot, and this is kind of a funny one. And I'm not mad. I love people in network marketing, but this one's just is easier for me to illustrate it with because a lot of people have a bad experience with network marketing. Some people love it. I love the industry. I think it's great for, it develops entrepreneurs. It's like the beginning of most entrepreneurs. But anyway, so think about this. Like if somebody comes up to you and pitches you our network marketing opportunity, initially what happens is there's false belief like, oh, if I do that, if I join that pyramid scheme or whatever they want to say, I'll lose all my friends and my family members. So that's the false belief they have. So then it's like, why do they have that false belief? Some experience they had. So usually experience is one of two things. Either they tried it in the past and they had a really bad experience, or they met somebody who tried it and they got called by somebody on the phone and that person annoyed them and they're like, oh. And so that was the experience they had. So now we know here's the false belief, there's the experience. Now, what's the story that they're telling themselves? So the story they're telling themselves of, if I join a network marketing opportunity, I'm going to lose my friends and my family members because I have to annoy them and bug them. So that's the story. Now, I used to personally have that same false belief before I got started in network marketing. But what's crazy is I had a friend, and this is a true story. So I had a friend, he came up to me and he tried to pitch me on network marketing opportunity. And instantly my subconscious belief, like, no, I'm not going to call my friends, my family members. I'm not going to do that. He's like, no, dude. He's like, I figured out another way. He's like, I created these landing pages online. I created a landing page, and on the landing page it says, if you're interested in learning about how to make money on the internet, give me your name, email, phone number. I'll call you on the phone and explain this really cool system we have. He's like, and then I drive ads. I buy ads. People come to the page. They fill out the form. And literally they're telling me, yes, please call me and tell me about your opportunity. He's like, then I just call those people on the phone and I sell them the opportunity. But I'm not calling my friends or my family members. I'm only calling people who raised their hand, who asked me to call them about a money-making opportunity. That's it. And I was like, is that real? And he showed me, and I saw this stuff. I was like, it's real. So all of a sudden it took my false belief and it crushed it. And I was like, I can actually try it. So I went and actually tried it. So I set up a landing page. We started driving traffic to it. And what's crazy is in about a year period of time, I actually became the #1 money earner in that company, and I won a Ferrari. And so for me now, when I tell somebody, like someone wants network marketing, I'm like, hey, you want to do network marketing? Like, I can't. False belief story. I'm like, I had the same false belief you did. But check this out. I had this friend, he told me this thing, and I told him that exact story I told you, right? And I won a Ferrari. I showed it to him, and I said, the first time my friends and my family members found out that I was in network marketing is when I drove the Ferrari home. Like, how'd you win that Ferrari? I'm like, oh, I'm in a network marketing company. They never knew until I'd already won the Ferrari. And then all of a sudden, it makes their false belief, like, I could get the result without the false belief. And so that's where story comes from me. It's just like, I keep thinking through, what are all the false beliefs my customers have? And then, like I said, the Dan Kennedy event, we sat there and wrote down inventory stories. Okay, I have my potato gun story. I've got my story about the Ferrari. I've got the story about, and I start listing out all these different stories. And eventually I remember flying home from that event, I just kept writing down. By the time I got home, I had 30 or so stories I'd written down. And I was like, okay, now I know the story, but how do I tell the story? And so for me, I had started a podcast. It was called Marketing in Your Car. This is my original podcast back 10 years ago. I would drive. I had a 4-minute commute to my office every day. So I had my phone. And so I would just click record on my phone. As I'm driving, I would just tell a story. And so I tell the Ferrari story, and I tell the potato gun story. And I just kept telling these stories. I tell them on my podcast. And then somebody would have me on a podcast. I would tell there. And I come in the office, and my team was like 3 people at the time, but I would tell them the story. I just kept practicing telling the story. And the very first time I tell a story, people were like, okay. Like it didn't land. Like I didn't know how to land it. But as I kept telling you, I got better and better at it till eventually I started getting, I knew what the beats were that got people to respond to the story, right? This is the mastermind group that Brendan Bouchard put on. It was Brendan Bouchard, and Lewis Howes and Trent Sheldon, and all these amazing people were invited to it. And I remember no one knew who was coming. Brendan said, show up at the airport and we're taking you somewhere on a helicopter. I was like, what is this? Like, do you trust me? So I fly to Wyoming, I get out, and I'm at the baggage claim, and I see Tom Billy, who's the owner of Quest Nutrition at the time. I'm like, that guy's the billionaire. And I'm looking at all these people, I'm like, I hope they're on my helicopter. Anyway, we all get in this helicopter, we're flying to this little mastermind retreat. And then that first night, we're sitting around the campfire. And I remember Dean Graziosi told this story, and this was a story so powerful. He said, you think about a really good comedian, you see them on the Tonight Show or something, you get up there and they tell their jokes and everything just lands. It's like, that person's the funniest person in the whole world. But it's like, if you look at how they actually become good, he's like, it's not through that. What happens is they sit down one day in their apartment and they write out 10 jokes. And then they go to a dive bar and they go to that bar with maybe 20 people in there and they tell the 10 jokes. And he said, what normally happens is of the 10 jokes, maybe one of them lands and all the rest are just bombs, right? So that next night they go back home, they take the one joke that was good, right? They keep that one and they write 9 new jokes. And then they go to the next dive bar and they do the one joke that they know is going to land, boom. And then they do the other 9. And from the other 9, maybe 2 land. And now they got 3 good jokes. So that night they go back to the apartment, they take the 3 good jokes and they write 7 more. And they keep doing this process over and over and over again until they got 10 flawless jokes. And then you see them on the Tonight Show and they do it and they just land it, everything's hits. And so same thing is true with story. People are like, how do I become a good storyteller? You got to tell a bunch of stories and see which ones lands, which ones don't land. And so for me, that's what I do. I do it on a podcast, and I do it on an interview, then I tell my friends, I tell my wife, I tell my kids, and I'm just watching how are they reacting to these stories? And I got better at telling the stories, right? So initially I had those 30 stories, and I kept telling them until I got really good at those 30 stories. I just knew them. And anytime someone asked a question, boom, this is a story that's going to come in. And then what happened is then everything in your life starts becoming a story. You start looking around every experience, there's a story. And so all of a sudden you're I could tell that as, I could tell, and these stories start appearing till eventually it's you have so many stories. And if you keep practicing telling them, subconsciously, they just show up when you need them. For example, right now, the Dean Graziosi story at the campfire, I was not planning on telling that. But subconsciously, all sounds like this story will help explain this thing. And it just pops in your head. You're like, oh, and then you just insert the story right there. And remember, I had a really cool conversation with Tony Robbins because the first time Tony spoke at Funnel Hacking Live, And he's speaking to this one again. And if you come to Funnel Hacking Live, you'll see like his team, they mind map out his entire presentation on these huge papers. They stick it on the floor when he's speaking. So like he looked down and he sees where he's going on this huge mind map. As Tony's doing it, like he'll like go off on tangents. The team run up and they'll rewrite and they'll like slap down new papers and they're covering up parts of the mind map to change, to get him back on course because he gets all distracted. And I asked him like, how do you do that? He's like, I show up with a plan. He's like, as I start talking, he's like, God literally just gives me the story I'm supposed to tell. It's like, and I'll go on these tangents. And he's like, it never makes any sense, but at the end, it's always perfect. And it's like, if you're prepared and you've done this stuff long enough, he's like, your subconscious mind, God will like literally just deliver these things up to you, and then you deliver what you need, and he'll give you exactly what the people you're speaking to are supposed to have. And so it comes from practice. And then if you keep doing it, then eventually you get a spot where like the stories just bubble up when you need them, and then you can deliver them. And then, and that's kind of the storytelling journey.
Beautiful. And it also allows you to be a little bit more receptive. So like same with the podcast, I'm sure like if you get to speak to people, you can come with all the questions, but if you just follow the questions as your itinerary, then it might not be, that would mean that you might not be listening very deeply because the conversation is going to take you somewhere else, right?
Yeah, for sure. You never want to lose the conversation because I've had some interviews where people are so stick to the questions. It's like, it's like, oh, we could have gone deeper on this topic and we missed the whole thing.
So this is a question from my friend John, and I have to ask before we go because he's going to get really upset. But he says, does Russell focus on being profitable or break even on the front end, or does he go in the negative and focus on ITV of customer?
Ooh, great question. That's definitely the nerdy guy question. You read my book question. Yeah. So for me,
he was my groomman at the wedding, and so I was like, okay, he's so excited. He's probably more excited that I'm speaking to you than I am. So
I love it. Okay, great question. So my goal always is I want to break even point of sale. So that's always the mindset for me. And then during whatever they're buying, we are selling something that's the goal is to be profitable. So probably the best example, we have a 3-day event called Selling Online. We run it about once a month. It's $100 ticket, and then there's the VIP upsell and stuff like that. And so that funnel is very, very profitable up front. But we spend the first 2 times we ran that funnel first time was very profitable. Second time was a break even, and now we lose money every single time. But during the event, we make a $10,000 offer. And so the way we structured is from the $10,000 offer, we take, and this is kind of geeky, but this is for him. So we take $1,000 of that $10,000 and we put that back into the metrics of the funnel. The media buyers know that they can spend 100% of all the ticket price plus $1,000 of whoever upgrades at the back end. And so right now we know for a $100 ticket, our acceptable CPA for all of our media buyers is like $260, I think, is where that's what it ends up being. When you take all the cost, all the profit from the event and $1,000 from anyone who buys in the back end, ends up being like $260. So they can spend $260 to sell a $100 ticket, and that's kind of where we're at right now. And from that, we're spending like $50,000 or $60,000 a day profit, like in there to fill these events every single month.
So question for me is like, how do you have the confidence? You have to have so much confidence in your offer and how you sell. You can very quickly go out of business, right? You can just make an assumption that people are going to buy the 10K offer and then they might not. So how do you do it? Genuinely.
I baby step into it. So I baby step into it because I'm the same way. Like it makes me nervous, and especially I'm the same way as you. Like I bootstrapped everything. I don't have financiers who are financing. This is all bootstrap. So the very first event we did was just my own list. There was no external cost. We did the very first event, and people went through. And from the ticket sales, the upsells from the actual funnel, we made $270,000 from the ticket sales before the event happened. Okay, so that $260,000 in sales, we did not spend that. That's not my money. That's Zuckerberg's money. So we took that money, set it aside, and then I did the event. We sold the $10,000 thing, and then that was my money, right? So we made that, and then we knew, okay, based on our own list, X amount of people signed up. This is what percentage bought the back end, and then that was the profit we made. Now, obviously, when you do your own audience versus cold audience, the conversions are not going to be the same. But what we just did, we had our audience fund the next event. So we took that $275,000, and that became our advertising budget for event number 2. So our team just spent that $275,000. We filled up event number 2. And then we did the thing in the back end and we sold it, and my conversions went down. So my warm audience bought way more, so the conversion went down, but now we knew what happened. So we spent the $270,000. We did the second event, right? And then we knew based on colder traffic, here's kind of what it converted at. So in the third, we did all the ticket sales from that first event. We then took that that promoted the third event, but now we knew kind of like based on that type of traffic, what we should make on the back end. So that's when we started increasing what we were willing to spend for the third event. And then the fourth event, we just kind of baby stepped into it. And that's kind of how we've done it. I never want to have an entrepreneur myself, like risk money up front. So it's like, if you have an audience, do the first one, just your own audience, but you're dog earing all the money that comes through the funnel. Like that's not your money. That's money to spend to fill the event next month. Right. And the money you sell on the back is the money that you get to keep. And so that's kind of how we baby step into it.
Yeah, and it's very easy to spend the money that you make, right? Because it feels like, oh, this is super exciting, but at the same time, I mean, it is.
I always tell my team, I'm like, the money from the funnel is not your money. That's Zuckerberg's money. That goes back into ads. We get the money it makes on the back end. That's the only money we're allowed to have.
Yeah. I mean, I feel really bad because I haven't ran ads to my courses yet. It's all organic traffic, but I know I have to get around it. But for me, ads are quite intimidating because I feel like I know my audience so well. I know how to speak to them. And every time I've attempted ads, it's just not the same level. I'm like, oh, I don't know these people. I don't know how to speak to them. It's almost like learning a completely new thing. And I just think it's
that language pattern, right? So it's learning the new language that goes to the cold audience. That's the tweak.
Yeah. And so that's definitely a skill that we're diving deeper, and it's very humbling. And part of me obviously wants to retract back. I was like, oh, this is so much easier to talk to your organic audience. But at the same time, I'm the kind of person that like, I kind of want to figure it out. Like it just.
Let me tell you a secret, what I would do if I was you?
Yeah.
Because I think you have all the assets you need. So this is how we're doing right now, how we're scaling our live event too, is like, we're leveraging the other people. So like, for example, I saw the podcast that you did with Dave Asprey, right? So you have that. So like what that does, that now it extends your credibility to the whole, like his whole world and Tangier works. Like I would do is I take clips from your podcast, and that's actually the ad. If you look at right now, our highest converting ad for our event is from a podcast interview with me and Grant Cardone, and him talking about me selling how much I sold. And so that podcast clip, and then we'd run it to Grant's audience. It's like, that's our highest converting ad and fun. Like we're just bringing everyone from Grant's world into our world like crazy. So you can do the same with the Dave Asprey one, but how many people in the biohacking world have you interviewed? Or had you interviewed?
Yeah, lots.
Like you take those clips, now you're extending, like you make an ad from like the highlights of that podcast, that ad, and then you're targeting their audience. Now since like your face with their face, implied in credibility, you grab those people, bring them in profitably, but you're leveraging their language they already have with their audience to bring people in. I bet that would crush it for you and bring in a ton of cool people. And then every time you do a podcast interview, it's like, I'm doing this partially for the social, but I'm looking for a 2.5 minute clip that can I turn to an ad from this. It's going to drive their whole audience back to me for the next year.
Wow. That's so powerful. And I think it's so far podcast has been for me just like such a self-fulfilling, I don't want to say a hobby. Like I haven't been planning on making money from a podcast, and there were like agencies like, oh, if you join us, we'll promote you. And I'm like, it's like, but then there's all this list of people that you need to interview, and I'm very independent like that. I would rather just do something smaller, but like something that feels more authentic and organic. Because they already tell me you can never speak anybody who's not like a doctor, nutritionist, and ideally a woman, because it's better for your brand to never speak to men. I don't want to come across as a men hater, no thanks. I think men are amazing, but that was like, they were trying to create this brand that I don't want my brand to be about just like, women hating on men and stuff, right? Which is like, it's just a shame.
I'm technically a doctor of marketing. Does that matter? Just kidding.
Yes. Well, you're a man, but like you're married to a woman, so that's kind of ticks it off. But that's
I've got 2 daughters. It counts.
For sure. Russell, is there any advice that you would give me or any other women out there, just so we can finish on the female angle?
First of all, I want to say how proud I am of you. Like watching you over the last couple of years and your journey has been really, really fun. And I hope that the people who are listening to this, who've seen your journey, like a lot of times we're like, oh, that's so cool what she did. But it's like, every one of you guys who are listening to this, you have that same ability. You've all been given gifts by God to do something, right? You've gone through trials and you had successes and failures that like prepared you to serve somebody, right? And I think that they look at you as like a perfect model of somebody who's doing it. And, and for all our journeys, it's not perfect. Like I mess up all the time. I do stupid things that's embarrassing sometimes, but the reality is like, man, it is so fulfilling when you have a chance to change someone else's life. I was an athlete growing up. I was a wrestler. And the best feeling in the world I ever had was like, I would win a wrestling match and they would raise my hand. And like that feeling is like, I'd never felt something better until I had kids. And one of my sons' name's Bowen. His 6th grade of wrestling, we signed him for wrestling. He was so bad. He was the worst kid on the team. He lost every single match. And we would come home and he would cry and we worked so hard and we practiced and we tried. And like, no matter how hard we tried, he would lose. And his very last match of that year, he lost every match the entire year. The very last match, he went out there and he won. It was the first match he'd ever won. And he comes off afterwards, he gets his hand raised, he jumps over, he runs over, gives me a hug. And that feeling was infinity times better than any time I ever got my hand raised. And the same thing is true in business. I remember when I got in business, I won my first $1 million, my first 10 million. Like, and it's like me getting my hand raised. It felt so good. And eventually, like, I don't know, eventually got shallow to the point I got burned out. I was like, I don't like business anymore. It was like annoying. And that's when I started coaching other entrepreneurs. And I remember the very first time one of my students had success and like they were struggling. Also, they made like something I told them they did and they made money with it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that feels so much better than when I made money. And then I became addicted to that feeling. And then I was like, who else can I help? Who else? And like, and now like that's been my driving force for the last decades. Like, because I see it, someone who reads a book or does something with our software and then they have success and like they get their hand raised. I'm like, that feels so much better than me winning, like helping them win. I think that's what people are missing is a lot of times like, oh, like my success, I can never help anybody else. It's like, man, when you feel, and I know you felt that, right? Like when you feel like yes, someone else have that, it feels so much better than your own. And I think that I want people to understand like that's the call to contribution. That's God telling you like, you've been made for something more and you can change people's lives with the things you've gone through if you'll step into that calling and just do the thing. And it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be messy. It's going to be ups and downs. But if you're willing to do that, and then when the first time you change somebody else's life and they tell you like, you changed my life, that's the best feeling you ever feel. At least the best feeling I felt so far in my life. And that's why I keep doing this. So hopefully that'll be helpful.
How is that for storytelling? Another great story. So good. Russell, thank you so much for joining me on the show. It was such a dream come true. I'm so glad we made it happen. You're honestly the best. And thank you for everything you've done for every single one of us entrepreneurs. So it means a lot.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. So much fun and great to finally officially hang out with you. So
I
it's been
know.
awesome.
I'm so happy. Thank you.